the idea of mimicry came up, right? But let's say someday that we do have an AI that, you know, as far as we know, can have its own emotions, can have its own thoughts, can, cry or whatever the hell the equivalent is, be angry, right? Have faults, and has from what we see, a consciousness of its own. Will it be ever equal to a human? Different? Better?
So straight up, this has been the best episode that I've ever made for this podcast. So about a year ago, I started this podcast, and a little after then, I decided to name it Lives of the Party. Well, why? Well, because more so to getting popular and building a name, the reason I started this podcast was because I wanted to be able to explore topics that were interesting and then hold myself accountable and give myself leverage to talk to interesting people about the interesting things that I was interested about. So this month I did something a little bit differently. So Lives of the Party, right? Why do I call it that? Well, the same way you go to a party, you may see people at face value, but that's all you'll really see them as. And meanwhile, there's a lot more behind that face that is really complicated. And I really want to search that. And depending on each party you go to, you'll find different faces, and many of them will be very conflicting and complimenting. So you take a given situation, as it has been in the past on this show, homeless people within San Francisco, people within a hostel in Hawaii, and most recently it's been AI. I mean, I'm sure that you guys have seen AI. It's really amazing what's happened in the last few months. I didn't think that this would come so fast, and yet here we are with ChatGPT. And at the time that I at the time that I make this video, there's Google, and I'm sure there's many more on the horizon. And as someone who, doesn't really understand it to the levels of which I'd like to, I wanted to try something different. So in this case, in the lives of this party, the party of AI, it was 3 different individuals who I interviewed. One was my friend David D'Onofrio, who is a researcher who has had 2 published papers co-authored to his name regarding AI and machine learning. Talked to him about what made AI so special and so different, and how exactly does it work. Part 2 was my first geopolitical published author, Jose Abo. He had a finance and sort of analyst lens, but measuring the world and where things are, I was curious to know, okay, so where do you see this coming? And last and finally, my professor, Justin Caouette. Professor Caouette has been one of my favorite professors at Northeastern. I loved how he taught philosophy, he gave a certain belief, he would lean extremely heavily into it and say, oh, you believe this, or consequently the exact opposite, make you challenge what you truly believed. And at times it was very polarizing, but I feel it's because of having to come face to face with what you truly believe, or the extent, the consequences of what can happen. I really truly was able to grow as an individual, and a lot of other people were as well. So it was only right that for my last and final guest regarding the conversation of AI in this mini-series, it was him debating ethics, the politics, the social aspects, and, what does a post-AI world look like, And I think we had a very, very interesting conversation. Everything from being a parent to romanticization to politics to the outcomes of it, and many times very heartfelt sort of beliefs that ultimately trended to the idea of authenticity within humanity. That as much as AI may take over, will never truly go away. About halfway through, we experienced some technical difficulties, but I chose to keep it in because the conversation that came as a result of that was still very much worth keeping in. But otherwise, thank you so much, and without further ado, Justin. Oh my gosh. And of course, without further ado, Justin Caouette.
You had a really interesting story about how you're here, about the reason why you're here. You were not in the classroom before.
Yep.
You were in finance, if I remember correctly, the story.
So, yes, that was part of the story. So, when I was an undergrad, I went to I worked full time, and I was a manager at a residential group home program. So I did that for 5 years while I was an undergrad, and right before undergrad and right after undergrad. And then I got a little burnt out, and so after doing that for about 5 years, I took my management experience, and I knew I couldn't be in the field anymore. I wasn't connecting with the residents like I used to in the beginning, and I felt like they deserved someone who could give their all. And so, being burnt out, I sold myself to Bank of America as a small business specialist. I used my managerial experience, and she gave me an opportunity. I did it for 6 months, and then I sold myself to LensCrafters. And so I worked at LensCrafters as an apprentice optician and a store manager for 2 years while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life before I went to grad school.
You say sold yourself.
Yes, I sold that's exactly what it is.
Interesting. Now, do you think that came from having a job that had no meaning? Let's say you weren't working at LensCrafters, but you were working at, I don't know, a job that you felt gave you great meaning. Do you think you'd still feel that way?
So here's the thing. When I worked at the residential group home program, it was a job with meaning. But it also was a job that was taxing emotionally.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so leaving that job and then getting a job where I was making good money felt, well, at least I'm not making a difference, but the money's good.
Yeah.
But that didn't last long for me. After a year or two, I needed that meaning again. And so it's a great question. If I had a job with meaning, I probably wouldn't have thought about going to grad school, because grad school for me was that search for meaning. And when I got there, I knew I made the right decision.
Yeah. So from what I remember, and you telling me this, is as soon as you made this decision, you quit, you took all the money you'd saved up, and you immediately put into grad school, and you went across wherever it was to go and study.
Yeah. So the way it worked out was that I had a Lexus IS 300. I'll never forget it. I love that car. I had a Lexus. I was in my early 20s. I had a full-time job making good money. I think I was making around $90K a year at the time.
Yeah.
Which at the time, this was going on
That's
almost
really good.
15, 20 years ago. That was a pretty good
That's
amount.
a really good amount of money.
I mean, not anymore. It's not.
Not anymore,
It
no.
was. And so, what I did was I sold the car, paid off my bills, and moved across the country. I didn't pay for grad school. I got a full scholarship. I got lucky enough to get that at Washington State University. Applied to 12 schools. Only one gave me the scholarship. And not getting into 11 schools put a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
It really wanted me. I felt like I had to prove myself.
Yeah.
And so when I went to Washington State, I went all in. I aced everything, and I was able to get accepted to 12 universities out of 20 for my PhD. And I decided on the University of Calgary because while I was in Washington State, I picked up hiking. And Calgary is 1 hour away from Banff National Park, which is some of the best hiking in the world.
Yeah.
And so, that's what led me there.
It's really funny you say that, because at least for me, I mean, in terms of where I've been looking at a place to live, at some point it's not just, I mean, when you ask what is best for you or what's good for you, it's not necessarily in one way or the other. Right. But similar to you, I mean, being in San Francisco, I felt that, I mean, I surf, and it's half an hour away from Bolinas Beach, and it's $200 round trip from Hawaii, and about a few hours away from me from Yosemite, and then there's parks, and of course also the whole entrepreneurship culture. But it's a lot more well-rounded. So studying now, what I mean to say is, when I last saw you, I was studying tech and human values and ethics, right? And just the nature of your job, on top of teaching, you also research and you take a look at topics regarding social philosophy, ethics, politics, government. In the last few months, I'm going to guess that you've probably had a lot more conversations on how that may be affected in the next few years.
Yeah. In fact, I had a meeting. We had an emergency meeting at Rutgers University just last night where we discussed Chat GPT and how we need to change, if at all, the way that we construct our writing prompts for students and the way that we construct our classes. Some concerns are that you don't want to just give exams. I mean, we teach philosophy. We want students to think. And we want to, give them the ability to be creative. But can you really do that with an exam? On the flip side, if we just give, papers, is it possible for us to ask them questions in a way that doesn't make it susceptible to the use of ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's really interesting because now I'm not sure if you play with it a lot, but there's a lot. I mean, at this point, I would say it's about 85% of the way there, but that's more than enough to do a lot of things. And I've heard on the news how teachers are trying to combat that. For example, some people thought of bringing oral exams back, or starting your first draft in the classroom, having it be sent in so that it could be read, and that right before you then submit your final draft, whenever that is, just so they can compare it and see if your writing style is similar to your final one.
Yeah, I mean, you taking the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly some of the suggestions that were thrown around yesterday at the meeting. Should we be doing this? And so some of us are of the feeling that we shouldn't change anything. Maybe we should change the way that we ask questions. Maybe we should change the way that we grade. But overall, we should still be doing the same thing. And if students want to use ChatGPT as an avenue to do that, it's not clear to us yet that they're producing a material. And so as long as it hasn't reached the level of a material, if they want to settle for the B and have ChatGPT kind of push that out, then so be it. It's not for us to kind of police. It's for us to kind of offer, a way of understanding the world and to help open their eyes. And if they want that, they're more than welcome to do it. But if they want to just use a tech instead, I think that's their loss. And so that's not something I should be trying to police. I need to really just focus on making sure that I bring my A game to the conversation by being well read, by staying up on the research, by making sure I know my students. Because if you get to know your students, I think students are less likely to try to put something forward that's not from them. And so
you're saying by offering that genuine connection, you incentivize them just to be a good person.
I think so.
Be more honest.
And just to be the best version of themselves. If you can convince them that they're not going to get as much out of using ChatGPT, then the student who really wants to get the most out of your class is not going to use it. Whereas the student who doesn't really care to get much out of your class, they probably weren't going to get that much out of it anyway. They're
just going to regurgitate whatever they found online and piece it together. I think that the purpose of education, or the purpose of what college is, and you're free to agree, disagree on this. I think it's completely going to change. I think that at least here, you go to school to get a degree so that you can look decent enough on a job. But at some point, when ability and intelligence is going to trend towards zero, the value of it because of this intelligence we have, going to college is going to be more so to learn, less so for the grade, but more so for the ability to learn.
And so you don't think – so let me understand your position correctly. So you don't believe that we're there to learn now. You think it's more of a formality to get a piece of paper to get the job?
So I think that different people come in with different ideas, different incentives. I think that there's – it's very layered. But, for example, some people see undergrad just as a stepping stone because if they're trying to become a doctor, right? I know people who take, totally unrelated undergrad classes just, because it's, I'm just doing this so I can, go to med school. I think purpose of why people are here, I think it completely depends. For someone like me, right, entrepreneurship is something that I'm concerned about, and therefore grades are not something that I personally cared about. It was more so how can I take what I learned in my classes and how can I apply that? So whether it was how to think and how to sort of see myself morally and ground myself in reality when it comes to building a company, or understanding, this specific marketing concept, or when I was in San Francisco last year and just kind of learning how to, be comfortable being uncomfortable, or how to pitch and how to speak. Grades have never really mattered to me because my ultimate goal was to win the competition of business. But, you take, for example, someone who wants to excel at a big firm, right? Grades matter, right? I mean, Boston Consulting Group, I somehow slipped in, but normally, they won't even look at you if your GPA is below 3.8. If you want to be a consultant, yeah. And Google's the same way when it comes to computer science students. So that's kind of where I'm sort of uncertain, because when grades do matter, right? Okay, I think that system is going to have to change.
I'm all for it if it does change in that way. In the way you described.
Same.
I think that the second that we get rid of grades, I think the better, less anxiety will be in our student body. Better conversations will be had because they're not going to feel like they're going to be judged, and that judgment's going to impact their grade.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a great thing for education overall if we don't have grades.
Completely. I
think they're arbitrary. I don't think they accurately represent what students are learning in the classroom. We're all kinds of different learners. And so not every professor speaks to all learners the same. So some are going to get we're biased towards certain kinds of learning styles as it is, and that's negatively impacting lots of individuals. I could go on and on about how I think grades are bad. So if we move in that direction like you're suggesting, then I think that's a great thing. And if ChatGPT is going to push us there, then that's a positive to the tech that I wasn't foreseeing that I welcome.
Okay, so let's move from education then to another area. Let's look at, we'll save politically for the end, but socially, there's many areas we can go into this. What are your thoughts on how this is going to look?
I think a lot of people are going to have relationships with tech in unconventional ways. And so, for instance, right now, if I was to have a relationship with someone, it would be a someone. It would be a person. And I'm not convinced that we're far away from a time where those relationships are being had with AI.
Yeah.
And do I think that's a good thing? I'm not sure. I think human connection is super important. I think it's the foundation of humanity.
Yeah.
Is having that connection.
Yeah, completely.
And if we start to lose that, I think we start to lose the most important part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I'm concerned about things moving in that direction, but I do think that we will see a higher percentage of relationships being had with AI. And given the importance of human interaction, I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah, I'm very unsure about that also. I completely agree with you. I think that by nature we're social creatures, and I think that technology, as great as it's been, right, it's also sort of driven us apart. As time goes on, as the square footage of our homes increase, so too do the amount of close friends we have. The amount of close friends, I think, I can't remember the stat, but I think 20 years ago, 20 or 25 years ago, the average person could say they had 10 close friends, right? About 30% of the population. Now 30% of the population say that they don't even have one close friend. I think that the idea of social media is great in that, we're super connected, and I could, and I do regularly, right? Talk to my relatives around the world, talk to my friends around the world. But then there's also this sort of side effect, and that's kind of made us more lonely in the present.
I agree. I read an article the other day where if you met with one friend each week, every single week for 1 hour, it ends up being for the rest of your life, ends up being 2 years of your life. The average person spends about 10 hours a day on media, different media, whether it's social media, whether it's on your phone, just checking, whatever it is, 10 hours a day. 10 hours a day over the course of your life from adulthood on is about 28 years. And so that's about 14 to 1 difference. And that time is by yourself.
Yeah.
For the most part, when when you're dealing with media, you're alone.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, I think it's a bad thing, especially someone I love being in the outdoors. I think, I didn't love it until I started doing it, and then I was like, wow. And I think lots of people would have that same reaction if they actually got out and did it.
Yeah.
But less people are apt to do that if you don't have people to do it with.
The side effect of that is sort of introversion and sort of fear within a social setting. I asked one of my, I was talking to one of my other professors who's been teaching for a while, and he told me that he's actually noticed a pretty extreme difference in just how people interact in like the last 5 or 6 years. He had students beforehand who, when he would put them in group activities, like he couldn't really put his finger on it, but the nature of how they would interact then versus now, it's not that it's standoffish now, but it's different. People are not as, or like people my age are not as open to interacting. Have you seen that, or you can't really say?
A little bit. One thing I did notice, and this is related, is that when I teach a class online, so right after the pandemic, during the pandemic, I was teaching online. The interactions that I've had with students that I've taught asynchronously is just night and day different than the students I've had in the classroom.
Yeah.
So for instance, if a student has disagreed with me on a grade in person, if you've had me in class, you approach me, we talk about it, and 99 out of 100 times, we're going to at least respect each other enough to respectfully disagree, or respectfully agree and come to an agreement. We're going to talk it through, and we're going to respect each other at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I just don't see that in the asynchronous environment. I had a student completely go right over my head to, I deserve this grade, didn't even contact me about it. I've taught over 75 classes, never once have had that issue. Yet the first time I teach asynchronously,
it happens.
It happens. So I think this speaks to your point that like the further away from human interaction we get, the more willing we are to throw each other under the bus, to not come to agreements, to not interact, as you were suggesting with regards to in-class assignments.
Yeah.
I think it's all connected, and I think it's all due in part to our our excess of screen time and our deficit of human interaction.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not to say I'm anti-AI or I'm anti-tech. I think tech is important, and I think it's an important tool that we should use to grow as a civilization. But how we go about incorporating it into our lives is going to be it's going to be important to how we develop as a country, as humanity. So
I tend to be stoic in that I sort of have two views, right? There's the idea that technology is going to continue whether people like it or not, right? And then there's the other view I have, well, is this better for us? I don't know if you've read Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus.
I haven't.
So Yuval Noah Harari, he previously wrote *Sapiens*, and that basically just talked about how basically humanity did different areas of kind of who we are, how we became, and Homo Deus came out a few years ago, but it was sort of a thought exercise on who we will become, and he says so Homo sapiens, humans, Homo Deus means God. And he talks about how, even now we have some things in our normal lives that that civilizations would write about as a godly power, like the ability to travel faster than sound, or the ability to talk to anyone in the world. Like we can do that, right?
Absolutely.
In some ways, we are already gods. However, going forward, I kind of lost my train of thought with that. But there's so many things that we're just uncertain of that are going to get there. Actually, I found it. So basically, what he says, though, is yes, our life on paper is better, but we can't, as far as we can tell, we can't see that we're any happier.
Okay.
There's less disease, there's less war, but at least, for example, you take a look at the U.S. and there's a epidemic of sort of depression that is especially encroaching on young people.
So yeah, are we getting? Is this making us better? Is it making us worse? Are people happier? It's tough to say, to be honest with you. I mean, it's a big question, and it's covering, multiple countries, multiple. It's tough. It's tough for me to put my finger on. That said, if I had to kind of forecast if it's going to help us or not, I think it depends.
Yeah.
I think it depends. Depends on the leaders that we have in place. Those leaders are the impact that they have on how we interact with new technology is, I think, more important than the tech itself. And if we don't soon get the leaders that we need, I think that should be our concern.
Do you think
more than the tech? The tech can be utilized just like tech can be utilized in any facet of our history. The television could have been used X or Y. The computer could have been used for the technology for the atomic bomb could have been used to do something completely different. How this tech gets used, I think, is more important than the tech itself. The tech is inevitable, but how we use it isn't. And so, given that the leaders of our day, the educators of our day, are kind of getting this next generation of users of tech in a certain mindset, I think that is more important than actually the tech itself.
Yeah.
And given that we don't really prompt up education in the way that we have even just a generation ago, that demise is, I think, the part of the problem with regards to the epidemic that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not so much the tech as it is the education system just not having the funds or the resources or the individuals involved in it that we should. And because we're getting pushed to do other stuff, because of our capitalist kind of environment. Not that I'm anti-capitalism. It's just it's really pushing lots of our brightest minds that would be great educators and great mentors and into different fields. Yeah. And I think we all lose out when that happens.
Oh my gosh, there were a lot of different tangents that I could have jumped on. I'll go off the most recent one. Basically agreeing with you in that I think that a lot of intelligence sort of trends towards finance.
Okay.
Right. And as you said, like I think that there's a lot of intelligent minds that tend to go towards making the money when that could be towards sort of being an educator or being a caretaker or some other field that could very much benefit us as a society. I mean, like in your point, I forget which Scandinavian countries, but they pay teachers the equivalent of an engineering degree.
Right.
In Japan, you can't even be a teacher unless you're the top 10% of your class.
Right. That makes complete sense.
That makes complete sense.
Right.
And meanwhile, in Oklahoma, you have teachers who have to buy pencils for their classroom.
It's here in Massachusetts as well. It's nationwide, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I cannot help but think about how, like, that is such a short-sighted decision. I mean, I'm sorry, no. Depends on where the incentives lie.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, like, I mean, let's say not to get conspiratorial, but you have people who are elite. If you want to keep a population down and stay ahead, you keep them as dumb as possible, right? That's why in like monarchy times, right? I forget the way that works, but like the way of government where there were peasants and then people who own the land. I forget what type of
medieval times you're thinking, like feudalism.
Feudalism, yeah. You keep your population uneducated because if you keep them uneducated, they won't even realize they're oppressed.
Right.
And so then you can continue the system at the top. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's happening. Well, I kind of do, but we're just voting for the wrong people. We're not getting the people in place that, I mean, at the end of the day, we pay taxes.
Yeah.
That money should be spent on things like education and health. It seems so obvious to me.
Obvious.
I spent 7 years living in Canada, and before I got there, I was told how bad socialized medicine was. Like, it's really bad. Ooh, well, be careful. I went there, and I had a great experience. Yes, there was some wait times. I've had more wait times here with great health coverage than I did in Canada.
Yeah.
My son has type 1 diabetes. It got handled a lot better in Canada than it does in the United States, and he has health coverage. And so for me, it's a no-brainer that we need to put on the forefront health insurance and education needs to be prioritized, and it's not.
It's not.
It's just not.
It's not. No.
I mean, and we've had conversations. I've had conversations in the classroom with students about getting an education for free. Should a state university be provided for us to the taxpayers? And I absolutely think it should. Again, in Canada, if I was going to Tim Hortons and I'm grabbing a coffee, the individual who's giving me that coffee is an educated person because everyone has an education out there if they want it. They don't have to be pushed away because of the price of education. $67,000 a year to come to Northeastern. That's absurd. $67,250 to be exact per semester. And to me, that is so elitist and so wrong in so many ways, especially given that the educators who are actually teaching the classes, they're not seeing that money. Like our rate of pay is laughable compared to what the amount of money that was in this classroom today was in the millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And the pay was very far from that, let me tell you.
Where does it go?
It goes to expansion. It goes to building the newest building. Because Northeastern's not big enough. They got to keep going. They got to go global. They have to have a campus here and there. Yeah. They're always looking to expand. That's always the vision of a university president, rather than just owning what we have, making what we have better by getting better educators here. And you're going to get better educators here by paying more educators. Like, I'm a part-time employee here. Why does Northeastern have any part-time employees? They don't need part-time. Why do they have them? Is because it's cheaper for them to have them. And so they're cutting corners there. And granted, I still believe I'm a pretty damn good professor. But, I mean, at the end of the day, if I was getting paid to just be here, I could give all my resources to these students. And so that conversation, I could stay every night till 7, 8 o'clock because I wouldn't have to go to another school to teach. Instead, I could sit here and have deeper conversations with the students who want to have them. And to me, that's much more beneficial than spreading myself thin and having to work at multiple schools. You know, and Northeastern knows this and so do the educators. But, you know, at the end of the day, hey, we can get by paying them, 10 cents on the dollar rather than paying them at a full-time rate. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem here is that we're looking at education as we do other markets. And I don't think that healthcare or education should be marketized in the same way. Mm-hmm. And I'm a free market guy. I believe in capitalism. I believe in that. Yeah. I just don't believe that everything should fall under that purview. And I think health and education are two things that should be outside of that scope.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the government's job is to pay for things that the free market would not be able to handle the right way. Okay. Like, I mean, for example, like you have Eisenhower's interstate highway system, right? That was about $500 billion, but it was made because it was made because it was believed it would be more profitable for the citizens who lived in the U.S., which it did. It returns about $6 for every dollar that it cost to maintain it. I agree. Like, I think that if you had a population that was healthy and educated, right, you wouldn't have the sort of, I don't want to say it like the people
social dysfunction.
Yeah. That's the PC way to say it. Yeah.
Well, that's another thing. In the current climate that we're living in, you have to kind of know the PC way to say everything, because especially in an environment in which many of the academics, many of the individuals who are in these positions are in precarious positions because they're not full-time, they have to watch what they say.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately.
I think that, like in terms of being part of the system, in order to, be in it, you have to play it. And a lot of it plays politics. And I mean, if you agree with everything, that's great. But if you don't, I think the idea of education is that you should be challenged, right? You should read things that make you question yourself. Exactly. As an example, right? I recently read the Unabomber Manifesto, right? I read it because, this dude has to be dumb, insane out of his mind. But reading it, I'm like, oh my God. 80% of everything he said was right.
Yeah, spot on.
He brought on
not
facts.
all of it, that's for sure.
Not all of it.
Absolutely, but he made some excellent points.
He made excellent points. He talked
his critique of some of the way that the country was going at the time. I thought was spot on.
Yeah, his commentary on society and government, and how people interact with each other. It was this was not like a crackhead. To an extent, right? But this was
right. I'm not sitting here and just cheer on the Unabomber and some of the horrible things he did, but just This is the idea that he could have even said something that was remotely palatable is questionable for us to say in certain circles.
Of course.
And that to me is, it's sad. It's a sad state of affairs where we can't open-mindedly and openly discuss ideas.
Yeah.
We're not at that. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think every single idea is worthy of conversation.
Of course.
That said, I think we're leaning towards the other extreme where many of us don't even want to have the conversations anymore because we're so concerned about how it'll be misrepresented.
Yeah.
And so even having these kinds of conversations, for many people, it's off the table because they don't want it to be cut up in a way that could make them look like, oh, did you see that little cutout? He was cheering on the Unabomber. Oh, get rid of him. He doesn't belong on campus. But I mean, unfortunately, that's the kind of world we're living in. And so, I mean, how much I think that's a lot worse of a place where you can't speak to someone and have a high-level conversation about anything because they're too worried about the repercussions of having that conversation.
Now, why do you think that is? Why do you think polarization has increased so much? I mean, I tend to think that it's been social media and just the way that you tend to have this sort of this societal illusion. Like, for example, what I mean by that is 10% of users on Twitter, for example, make up 90% of the content. That includes the tweets and the photos and whatever. And so people tend to have this view. I mean, I've experienced this firsthand, right? It feels like the world is like falling down at some times. You listen to some topics and you think that, oh my God, people are like ready to go to war. And then you go to Times Square, everyone's just chilling out. Yeah. You know? Do you think that that's played a role in it? Do you think it's...
Absolutely. I think it's a few things. First, I think white fragility is a thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, as a white male myself, it's a thing. And so as power structures change, people want to push back against that. People are feeling, especially in the white community, I think people are feeling attacked. And unfortunately, I think you're running out of juice.
Keep talking.
Yeah.
Recording.
Unfortunately, I think that because white individuals are feeling attacked, they're starting to revert to things and ideas that they normally wouldn't feel comfortable endorsing. Now they're becoming palatable to some people. And from my perspective, it's so disappointing to see because I see individuals who I once respected, who once was open-minded, and they no longer have that open-mindedness because they feel like they're over it. So I think it's a mixture between this white fragility. I think between the oppressed, you know, they've been oppressed for so long, they've been put down for so long that they're on a rampage to kind of get to be heard. But I think that they're such on a rampage to be heard sometimes that they're willing to throw anyone under the bus that doesn't drink every piece of Kool-Aid or every ounce of Kool-Aid that's available. Yeah. And so it's this perfect storm where you got legitimate people who are oppressed who need to be heard, and then you got this group of individuals who have held on to power for so long, and they're losing track of that. And I think when those two worlds combine in an informal format such as social media, where it's not personal at all because you're not actually standing across from another human, I think that's the perfect storm that we find ourselves in. And I think that's why we're so willing to be polarized.
All right. I'm just going to pause.
It died out?
It didn't die. Ran out of storage. So I'm just going to remove this and then take it out. We've been going for about an hour, but I think about 20 more minutes.
Okay.
If you're okay with that?
Yeah. I got to go about 6:40.
Okay.
6:45-ish. Cool. Yeah. Is this still good?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I got to be in Providence for 8:30. So.
For what?
Drinks with a colleague from Providence College.
I was about to say, I thought you were going to be teaching at this time. I was
No.
I got
on a Friday night. No.
I'm like, all this part-time work's got you working on a Friday night.
No.
Oh my gosh. Wow. See, because the one thing that stuck out with you is I realized that you were willing to entertain things. The subject matter that so many professors would never even begin to have the conversation of.
I know.
Like you just, I don't know if it's playing chicken, that like you're just much more able. You just don't care because you just are more confident in yourself. But
no, I want to, like, to me, like, I'm getting something out of my conversations with the students. Like, yes, the students, I hope, are getting something out of it, and I think many have, but I'm getting something out of it too. I want to know what's making you all tick. Why do you think? I'm like, no, let's talk about this. Let's press it. So really, this is what you think? And then if you put people against the wall, they're like, oh shit, I don't really know. And then I think that's where growth happens.
yeah,
And so you have to kind of push the envelope a little bit to get that growth.
completely.
So if the whole class is just hardcore left, well, I'm going to play the right side just to kind of like push back. Likewise, if they're leaning a little right in a conversation and I'm not feeling it, well, I'm going to push back a little left.
No, completely.
And so because I feel like both perspectives need to be discussed because that's the real world we live in.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I thought this was really funny. Like during the whole like Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, right? I like was like, wait, like they're fucking like destroying the city, like that's fucking wrong, right? And like, I mean, there was that in the idea of like the organization in general.
Yep.
And it's funny because I was black, right? No one could say anything to me, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like, wow, I had this really weird sense of black privilege. Now I can say this shit, and no one else can say anything. Because like, because I would put stuff on social media, and right, my friends would be like, oh, like, how, you know, like, why would you say stuff over there? But then like me being black, it's like, oh, like you shouldn't say that. You just, you know, they couldn't say anything.
It's funny, man. So it's not, though. That's the thing. It's like we should be able to call each other out on our bullshit. And if it's not bullshit, well, then great. Now you have an opportunity to kind of explain yourself. And then I think everyone's better off for that anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's not always us talking. There's always other people listening, man. There's always other people listening.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not always about the person you're talking to. Sometimes it's about the audience that's digging in. So like even in the classroom, just like I had a student today. She was just in right field, like far right field, right? And I was entertaining it though. Like, okay, so that you understand that this means this, right? And you know, and one of the ramifications of holding that view, we're going to lead here, right? Well, no. I'm like, well, it does. Well, how wouldn't it? And then, you know, so I feel like it was a learning moment for her. But there was other people, I could tell by looking at their faces, they were like, they were agreeing with her as she was talking. And so it's like, all right, great. So now how are you all feeling about this pushback? Like, and I feel like that's how growth occurs. And I've had so many students come up to me and tell me, I haven't been able to have these kinds of conversations in the classroom until your class. And to me, that's devastating. Because it's like, damn, here you are at an elite institution as far as I'm concerned. You know, I feel like Northeastern is a top 50 school in the country.
Yeah.
And you can't have an open conversation about your views because you're worried about your grade being impacted by your professor.
Yeah.
That's disappointing.
Yeah. No, I mean, do you ever fear that you may get your job lost?
So I already think the reason I don't have a tenure track position is partly because of the way that I am. I honestly believe it.
Fair enough.
And so I feel like I've already kind of made some sacrifices to just
to
be this way.
Yeah.
But at least at the end of the day, I can sleep at night. At the end of the day, I still, you know, a lot of people have told me, hey, you know, you got to tone it down. You can't.
Yeah.
It's not so much in the classroom, but I'm like on social media, like I don't hold back. Like I'll get into it with anyone.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have said like they think that's why I don't have a tenure track position.
Yep. Makes sense. It's funny because I've been told the same thing by so many people also. Tone it down, don't say that. It's like, I don't know if it's like do you know about Phineas Gage?
Yeah.
The story?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like a certain thing that's like a little different that makes me okay. Maybe I've like you, had quite a few experiences where I've realized that, you know, can't hurt me.
Right.
And so I'm willing to.
Exactly.
But I don't know, like the idea of not almost kind of makes me feel like I'm like oppressing myself.
Yeah.
Being held down.
And so is that worth it?
No.
Right? Because I mean, what's the outcome? What's the end result? Like, do you want just to me, being myself and getting there, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
I gotta if you just handed me the tenure track job, like, and I had to, there was conditions. Oh, you can't talk about this. There's no discussion of this, and you can't do that, and like then I don't really want the job.
Yeah.
And like, have you turned down jobs for that reason?
No, but I have turned down jobs because of my son. So I could have taken a job abroad for a full-time position, and I would have taken it in a heartbeat, but I feel like my obligation to him to be around, to be present in his development as a human, trumps my desire to have that kind of job.
Yeah. At what point would you say that? Actually, I forgot what I was going to say to that. That is incredible. Why do you think that some people are willing to not sort of value their kids in the same way?
I think they just have a different value structure. And so maybe they don't feel like they have the connection with that child to the point where they're going to actually impact them by staying around in a way that is meaningful. And so it could be, self-deprecation, like that maybe they don't think they're a good parent. And so they don't think that being around is that important to that child. And sometimes that might be true, actually. So it's tough I think it can change, it can vary, but I think a lot of it is greed. A lot of people just put themselves first, and they figure if they just lead by example, their kid will follow. Personally, I think nothing can change the idea of being present. Lack of presence in my life, I know how it impacted me. And so I don't want to be that for him. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in a really, let me just do it so I can see. But just to go along with what you're saying, like one of the things that I consider one of the greatest parts about my dad is that he broke the cycle.
That's awesome.
In that I grew up never having any of that resentment brought on towards me. And he's very quiet about his past, but it was as I got older realizing that and realizing what my grandfather were like, that I started to have such an immense amount of respect for that. Because it's really hard.
It is, man.
To not impose sort of that and who you are, the negative sides, onto something, especially something so impressionable.
That's why I see him as teaching me more than I'll ever teach him. Because he's forced me to be a different person. Because I know that if I was bringing to the forefront or bringing to those conversations with him the emotions that I was feeling lots of times, that it was going to impact him in a way that he was just going to continue the cycle. He was going to be an angry kid. It's going to act out in certain ways because that's what angry kids do. That's what I did. And so I had to change who I was so he didn't pick up on those things. Yeah. And so I can never thank him enough for changing me in that way. Because if it wasn't for him, there's no way I would have been able to grow the way that I did. So I had him while I was in my first year of grad school. And so I needed to change at that time to be successful at grad school as well. My habits needed to change. There's just so much about me that needed to change. And it did because of him. Because I wanted to make sure I didn't impose those negative qualities on him. And it forced me to change him and myself, which I thought they were ingrained. I thought it was just who I was, but it wasn't.
Okay. A philosophical question for you. Okay. Oh, and also, could you just put your face a little closer to the microphone?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So we just talked about parents and how important a parent can be in a child's life, right? Let's say someday AI is so advanced, right? The state deems you as an unfit parent. Therefore, he will be raised by one of our new AI parents. He is just like you, will download all of your memories, so he's you, except with not the bad parts, right? He's smart, right? He knows exactly how to make your kid tick. So we're going to take him away.
Yeah, over my dead body. Well, that's first. No, but honestly, I could weigh on this in a couple of ways. First, I would never let that happen. But let's assume that we live in a world in which it does. I think it would be wrong to live in such a society. I don't think you can duplicate a person. I don't think that any AI can share experiences
I think, so I learn multiple things from an experience. I learn how to be better, and sometimes I get worse. And so the way that you described AI, like, oh, we're going to leave out the bad part of you. I think the residue of the bad that is still left in me is needed for the uptake for my son to believe what I'm telling him. So he's seeing that, oh, yeah, that's still a little rough there. Okay, I get it. But he needs to kind of see the little bit that's left over to kind of believe the advice that I'm giving him, I think.
I see.
And so I think the imperfect version of me is much closer to a perfect dad than the AI will ever be.
So it sounds like what you're talking about is authenticity.
Absolutely.
See, that's something that I think regardless of how AI comes into our life, that's still going to be that's predominantly going to be what is the value, right? You could write the best structured poem, but at the end of the day, it's your experiences, right? You can give the best speech, best essay, but you have to have your, like, those memories.
Absolutely.
With being like an educator or a parent, it's like, okay, like, so what? Like, why the hell does what you say matter to me?
Right. And I think that lack of authenticity in AI, it'll always lack that authenticity because it's incapable of experiencing the world. Yeah. It's only capable of regurgitating the information that past experiences have given. And until AI can experience itself, the things that it's writing about, I think that the writing itself will be lacking in some ways as well. So
then let's go and take it that way then, right? Let's say someday that, I talked about this with, my previous friend who was a researcher, and the idea of mimicry came up, right? But let's say someday that we do have an AI that, as far as we know, can have its own emotions, can have its own thoughts, can, cry or whatever the hell the equivalent is, be angry, right? Have faults, and has from what we see, a consciousness of its own. Will it be ever equal to a human? Different? Better?
Better in some ways, depending on what the scope of our evaluation is. I wish there was moments in time where I didn't feel emotions. So if in those moments it was actually beneficial for me not to have them, then I would say the better version would be the AI version in that second.
Yeah.
But overall, absolutely not. I don't think it could ever equal human experience because I think we are innately different. And what makes us different is this combination of free will and consciousness. And so I'm pretty doubtful that we can produce an agent that has free will or consciousness because we don't even know how free will or when free will comes about in us or how consciousness comes into existence. And so if we don't know how something comes into existence, it's a very small chance I think they'll be able to replicate it.
So there are ways to train an algorithm or to train a model. There's two different ways. I actually learned this recently. One is in the most abstract sense, you have an action and then you have a critic, right? But basically it rewards a good action or a good outcome, and then it punishes a bad action. But then there's another type of learning where it's basically evolution, in that you basically have a bunch of mini models, you throw them all out, you give them an objective. The ones that fail basically die, and you keep whatever works. And based on the environment, you just keep throwing new models until it gets exactly what you want. So, for example, they did this with having a bipedal model in the simulation, being able to walk then run. But I forget who, but they did the same thing with processor creation. So the things that go in computers. And at some point they played natural selection. They trained their model up until the point where the processor got so sophisticated that the researchers couldn't even begin to understand how it worked. How I think barring resources, at some point if we create something that can train itself or create something, right, that has almost limitless bounds. I mean, you play enough, like cycles, lifetimes of evolution, it'll I think you're right in that we probably won't be able to understand it, but I think it'll be just as capable as us.
So it depends on what you mean by capable, right? And so if we're measuring, the success of these things on their outputs, on their production, then success in that regard, then yes, I think I'd be happy to say that they're successful. But if we're measuring it on the kind of experiences that are being had, I don't understand what my thermometer is doing. Doesn't mean it's having a deep or meaningful existence. But I know that you have a deep and meaningful existence. Having a conversation with you, I know that because we share a commonality in being human and what that means.
Yeah.
And how that feels. Even though I feel a little differently than you do when something happens, we have enough commonality where that relation, I don't think, can be had with anything that doesn't share that commonality with us. And so programming it to have an emotion, I'm not even sure that's possible. Like, it might look like an emotion because if something with 7 pounds of force falls on this aspect of your body, then you must yell out in a cry, or a tear falls down your eye. If we program it to do that, is that the same thing as crying for you or me? I would say no. I still think there's a missing element there.
So something that I think about this actually is, I think that, a computer can't simulate itself in that there doesn't exist enough for it to be able to understand itself. I think that with us, there's a lot of sort of things within our mind, especially within the brain, that are just so complicated that we'll never be able to comprehend, but that I believe theoretically a higher being could look into and see, okay, well, based on the way that this neuron and this synapse is, this is pretty deterministic of why someone does this. And I think that, of course, I can't say so, right? For sure, because I am me in my brain with my limitations. But I think that, like, for example, how we're able to understand, like microorganisms. I think something that was more advanced than us could pick us apart as if we were a microorganism.
I see. And so you're thinking here that AI... Well, first of all, I want to say that there's ways in which I don't think we fully understand microorganisms, and I don't think we can.
That's true. That's true.
And so, how we look at microorganisms, we're just looking at them through the lens that we have.
Yeah.
And so there might be so much more going on there that we could ever know. And so I'm not sure. I just know that trying to duplicate the experiences that we have amongst ourselves as human beings could be very fruitful in lots of ways, but one way I do not think it'll be fruitful is replacing that interaction.
The humanistic element.
As if it's the same, because there is something of what it's like to be a human that I can't express, but when I talk to you and I talk to people I know, they feel me and you feel me. And so I just don't. Maybe I'm just lacking creativity here, but I'm skeptical that AI will progress to the point where we have that understanding with one another.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think it's that understanding that kind of really allows us to have the deepest moments of life. And if we can't, if that's what life's really about, is having those moments and striving to have those meaningful moments, then a life with predominantly AI in it instead of humans is not going to look as great to me.
Yeah. I will end this on sort of a note that's pretty optimistic.
Okay.
I think probably overly so. But my belief is that at some point when it becomes, barring resources and the wars for that, different story.
Yeah.
But I think barring that, there's going to be a point where it's going to become so advanced that, at least in the short term, there's going to be a lot of people who are not just unemployed, but unemployable, simply because anything that they would do, right, it's just not really going to fit into this greater narrative. And so, short of being like a caretaker or babysitter, right, I think that UBI is definitely going to be something that will be put in, but then that'll give people the ability to kind of just hang out and kind of go back to what we were in our hunter-gatherer days of when you weren't getting the food, just hang out, like we'll be able to sing, play guitar, like write. I mean, who cares if it's good or not? I mean, I'm sure an AI could do it better, but that's not the point, right? Everyone will be able to be a musician if they want to. Everyone will be able to play a sport that they want to.
If we are moving towards a UBI and people are not defined by their employment and they're allowed to be creative and enjoy, that sounds like a future I want to be part of. And if AI helps us get there, then I'm all for allowing it in. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think it's the technology itself that we have to. People. It's the leaders that we have in place as this tech is introduced. Yeah, I think is the most important thing. And so what I think we got to do is we have to align our values with the leaders of our day. If those leaders don't share our values, we need to not vote for them.
Yeah.
That's just how it.
That's
not to kind of go back to that, but that's kind of really what I think it boils down to.
That's where I get really scared because, I think TikTok is basically heroin but digital, right? And then I think the average age needs to decrease by at least 40, right? Because I think with this next few years, they don't know what the hell's coming, right? I don't know, But fun note to end on, Justin. Thank you so much. I appreciate
it was a pleasure.
This.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Good time.
Well, guys, stay tuned. Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode of Lives of the Party. But take care.
All right. That was fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. If you after you cut it up, you want to talk.